I used to think betrayal would feel loud, like shouting, like shattered glass, like a moment so dramatic there would be no doubt about when my life split in two. I was wrong. Real betrayal is quiet. It looks like a woman standing in her own kitchen at midnight, holding a pregnancy test that doesn't belong to her marriage, while the man she trusted sleeps peacefully down the hall. My name is Evelyn Moore. I was 34 years old when my husband told me I was going to be a mother. The strange thing is, I already knew I wasn't. Not because I didn't want to believe him, but because 3 years earlier, I had made a medical decision that made his announcement biologically impossible. I didn't scream when he said it. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even ask the obvious question. Instead, I smiled. I nodded. And I let him believe his lie had worked. Because by then, I had learned something important about the people closest to me. They were very comfortable lying in my house, using my money, eating my food, sleeping under my roof, and smiling in my face while they did it. My husband, Daniel, had been acting distant for months, unavailable, distracted, suddenly protective of his phone. But what I didn't expect was the role his unemployed sister would play in the destruction of my marriage. She had moved into our guest room temporarily. She had no job, no savings, no plan, and apparently no boundaries. They started with dinners, harmless ones, just the two of them, charged to our joint credit card. Then late nights, then secrets, then silence. So when Daniel sat across from me at our dining table, holding my hands and telling me this pregnancy would change everything, I realized something terrifying and clarifying all at once. He didn't know who I really was anymore. He didn't know what I knew. And he had no idea that every word he was saying was already being documented. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't reveal my medical history. I didn't give him a chance to rewrite the truth. I waited. I gathered evidence. And when I finally ended my marriage, I didn't do it with tears or begging. I did it by leaving everything he'd been hiding, his lies, his betrayal, and proof that the child wasn't mine, on his parents' front porch. That was the moment my silence ended. And his consequences began. Before everything collapsed, my life looked stable. I ran a property management company in Cedar Falls, the kind of work that sounds simple until you're the person getting calls at 6 a.m. because a pipe burst in a rental house and the tenant is screaming like it's your fault gravity exists. I liked the pressure, though. I liked fixing problems. I liked building something that was mine. And for a long time, I thought my marriage was the one part of my life that didn't need fixing. Daniel was 2 years younger than me, charming in a calm, polished way, never the loudest person in a room, but always the one people leaned toward. We met through work-adjacent circles, the way adults do when they're busy, a mutual event downtown, a conversation that lasted longer than it should have, a text the next day that turned into coffee, and then dinner, and then the slow, comforting rhythm of us. He worked as an event coordinator at a hotel downtown. He had a talent for making people feel taken care of, like everything was under control, even when it wasn't. That quality used to make me feel safe. From the beginning, we were clear about one thing. No kids. Not maybe later. Not we'll see. Not if it happens, it happens. I said it plainly the first time it became relevant, because I learned the hard way that avoiding hard conversations only delays the damage. I don't want children, I told him, watching his face carefully, bracing for the polite disagreement people try to dress up as understanding. But Daniel surprised me. He didn't argue. He didn't try to persuade me. He didn't do that casual, dismissive laugh some men use when they think a woman will change her mind. He nodded and said, honestly, same. I like my career. I like freedom. Over the years we dated, we talked about it more than once, not because I doubted him, but because I believed in checking the foundation before you build a life on top of it. Each time, he repeated the same thing. He preferred our life the way it was. That agreement mattered to me. It wasn't a minor preference. It was a core truth about who I was, and it was one of the reasons I said yes when he proposed. Because compatibility isn't just about loving someone, it's about wanting the same life. We married 4 years ago. The house we lived in was mine before the wedding. 4 bedrooms, 2 acres outside the city limits. Enough space that the wind sounded different out there. Quieter, like the world had stepped back a little. I bought it when my business started doing well, 6 years ago, and I was proud of it in a way I didn't always admit. Not because it was perfect, but because I earned it. Daniel moved in after the wedding, and it felt like a fresh start. We didn't get a prenup. Back then, I thought trust was something you proved by not preparing for betrayal. I know better now. Our finances were joint. I made more than Daniel, so I handled most of the bills. Not in a controlling way, at least not in my mind. It was just practical. Mortgage, utilities, big expenses, those landed on me more often. Daniel contributed too, and we never argued about money in the early years. We talked about vacations, renovations, weekend projects. We made meals together on Saturdays like it was a ritual, music on, the smell of garlic and onion, his hands brushing mine as we passed a knife or a bowl. And his family? I tried. I truly did. His younger sister, Sabrina, was complicated. She had a reputation even before she ever needed our guest room. She drifted between jobs, burned through money fast, treated responsibility like an insult. Daniel would call her spirited, and I would bite my tongue, because spirited is a nicer word than reckless. At our wedding reception, I remember leaning close to Daniel and whispering, half joking, half serious, "Your sister is going to be trouble someday." Daniel had smiled like I was being dramatic. "She's harmless," he said. "She just needs time to grow up." I believed him, because I wanted to. And because I didn't know yet that sometimes the people you marry don't come alone. Sometimes they bring the person who will help them destroy you. Looking back, I can pinpoint the moment my marriage started to tilt, so slightly I didn't recognize it as danger. About 7 months before everything came apart, Daniel changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have justified panic, just enough to make the air between us feel thinner. He stopped asking about my day. Not completely, just enough that our conversations became functional instead of curious. "Did you pay the water bill?" Replaced, "How did that meeting go?" We still lived together, still slept in the same bed, but it felt like we were rotating around separate centers of gravity. Weekend cooking stopped first. We used to make it a thing, music, shared chopping, glasses of wine before noon like we were celebrating something. Then one Saturday I cooked alone. The next weekend he said he was tired. After that, it just disappeared. When I came home from work, Daniel was either already asleep or in another room on his phone. The glow of the screen became a third presence in our house. We went 3 full weeks without having a real conversation that wasn't about logistics. I tried to bring it up, twice. The first time he sighed and said work was exhausting lately. The second time he kissed my forehead and told me I was overthinking things. So I backed off. That's what you do when you trust someone. You don't interrogate exhaustion. You don't demand emotional labor from a person who says they're tired. You tell yourself marriage has seasons, and not all of them bloom. Then one night in late March, Daniel surprised me. I walked into the smell of pot roast, rich and warm, filling the house in a way it hadn't in months. He was wearing the blue shirt I bought him for Christmas. He smiled when he saw me, really smiled, and kissed me at the door like it used to be natural. We ate together. He laughed at my stories about difficult tenants. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Later, we watched a movie on the couch, and he fell asleep with his head against my shoulder. That night, lying awake next to him, I thought, okay, maybe this was just a rough patch. 2 days later, his sister called. Sabrina had been kicked out of her apartment. The story came through Daniel first, relayed casually while he leaned against the kitchen counter. Apparently, Sabrina's landlord had discovered she'd been seeing a tenant's son, barely 21, and the situation escalated into a complaint. She needed a place to stay. Just temporarily, Daniel said, until she figures things out. I felt my hesitation immediately. Sabrina had never stayed anywhere temporarily in her life. She had a habit of settling into other people's space like it was owed to her. Still, I didn't say no right away. I asked questions. How long? What was the plan? Had she been looking for work? Daniel said we'd talk about it more that evening. When we did, I expected resistance from myself. Instead, I was the one surprised. Because I'd always been clear about Sabrina. I didn't trust her judgment. I didn't like how she borrowed money and repaid it selectively. I had said more than once that I didn't want her in our house for more than a dinner visit. So when Daniel suggested she stay, and then I heard myself agree, I didn't recognize my own voice. I told myself it was compassion. We had the space. The guest room had its own bathroom. She was family. What I didn't know then was that this decision wasn't kindness. It was the first crack. And once it formed, everything else slipped through. Sabrina moved in on a Saturday. 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, no plan. She hugged Daniel like she was coming home instead of crashing, then turned to me with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took the guest room on the main floor, the one with its own bathroom. My suggestion, offered automatically, because I thought proximity would make things easier. I was wrong. The first week felt manageable. Sabrina set up her game console and played music a little too loud during the day, but she laughed when I asked her to turn it down. She left dishes in the sink and towels on the floor, and I told Daniel gently that he needed to talk to her. He did, and she apologized, promised to do better. Then I made the mistake that still sits heavy in my chest. I told Daniel to tell Sabrina that if she wanted to stay without tension, she should try to get along better with me, that I was already doing us a favor by agreeing to the arrangement. Something shifted after that. The complaints stopped. Not because things improved, but because Sabrina stopped complaining to me. Instead, I started seeing them together. In the mornings, I'd come down to find them in the kitchen, coffee mugs in hand, talking quietly. They laughed a lot, inside laughs, the kind that don't pause when someone else enters the room. One Saturday, I woke up late and the house was empty. When they came back 3 hours later with grocery bags, Daniel said they'd gone shopping together since I was still asleep. It felt harmless. That's what made it dangerous. Then Sabrina started cooking breakfast on weekends. Eggs, bacon, things I used to make with Daniel. I watched from the doorway one morning as she leaned against the counter, laughing while he cooked. They moved around each other easily, like people who'd found a rhythm. They started running together in the evenings. Daniel had never been a runner. He used to complain about cardio, like it was a personal insult. Suddenly, he was coming home in workout clothes, flushed and energized, with Sabrina beside him, both of them laughing about something that happened on their route. I asked once if I could join. Daniel didn't even look at me when he said I'd slow them down. The meals changed. The dishes Daniel loved, the salmon, the roasted vegetables, disappeared. Instead, the menu shifted to things Sabrina liked: pasta, burgers, wings. When I mentioned missing our old dinners, Daniel said he was just trying new things. Then came the credit card charges. Restaurants I'd never heard of. A baseball game. A leather jacket from a department store downtown. When I asked Daniel about the jacket, he said it was a thank you gift for Sabrina, for helping out around the house. I looked around our kitchen that night, the same dishes still in the sink, the same trash I'd taken out myself, and didn't say anything. The moment everything tipped was a Friday evening in early May. I came home to find both of them dressed up. Daniel in a button-down, Sabrina in heels and makeup. They said they were trying a new restaurant across town. They didn't invite me. Daniel said I looked tired, said they'd be back early. They came home after midnight. I heard their laughter in the driveway, heard the car doors close. When they came inside, Daniel followed Sabrina into the guest room. I could hear their voices through the wall, low, animated, for nearly an hour before he finally came to our bedroom. He smelled like wine. When I asked if he had a good time, he said it was fine and turned away from me. That weekend, I barely slept. Nothing about their behavior made sense. Daniel had spent years telling me how immature Sabrina was. Now they acted like best friends. I still couldn't bring myself to call it an affair, but I knew something had crossed a line. On Monday morning, I told Sabrina she had 2 weeks to find another place. Her smile vanished. And when Daniel came home that evening, he called me petty, jealous, unreasonable. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was being replaced inside it. It's strange the way shock can come in waves. At first, I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. Sabrina was my sister-in-law. I had always treated her with patience. Even when she took advantage of my generosity, even when she made careless decisions that hurt the family, I gave her space. I believed in second chances. But when she and Daniel started acting like a unit, a team, something inside me started to wither. I had spent years learning how to navigate my own emotions, how to push them down when they threatened to overflow. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I kept it together. I held my silence. And I did that for a long time, until one evening, when Sabrina left the house and I found myself alone with Daniel. He stood in the kitchen, sipping his wine like nothing was wrong, but the air between us was heavy, thick with the unsaid things I had been too scared to voice. I tried to keep my voice steady. Why does she get to stay here, after everything? Daniel looked up at me, his eyes tired, guarded. He seemed distant, like I wasn't the person he had once shared everything with. "You've been busy, Evelyn," he said quietly, "and she's family. She needed help." It sounded reasonable, until it didn't. My chest tightened, and I felt a deep, nauseating shift in the pit of my stomach. All the things I had ignored, the dinners, the late-night talks, the strange bond they'd formed, finally crystallized. Sabrina had inserted herself into a space that had always been mine. The warmth between her and Daniel wasn't just family affection. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. And now, the invisible walls I had built to protect myself started cracking open. I stared at him, trying to keep my composure, but I couldn't anymore. "Don't you see it?" I whispered. She's everywhere." He stood there, not answering. I clenched my fists at my sides. "You're blind, Daniel, or maybe you just don't care anymore." I expected an apology, an explanation, something to make sense of everything. But instead, I was met with silence. "I'm not trying to control anything," Daniel said, finally speaking. But his words didn't sound like a promise. They sounded like an excuse. "You've been so wrapped up in your work, and I just need someone to talk to. Sabrina listens." The words cut through me like glass. A cold truth I had refused to see. The space I thought we shared, the home, the marriage, the life, had been infected by something I could no longer ignore. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. Instead, I simply nodded, took a step back, and left the room. The next few days were nothing short of torturous. Sabrina barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words felt hollow, like she was trying to convince me she was the innocent one. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a pang of betrayal. This was my home, my life, my decisions. But the one person I thought would understand? Daniel? He seemed more distant every day. I found myself staring at the empty space in our bedroom where our shared dreams used to sit. The house felt quiet, too quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but everything else was a dull ache in my chest. I couldn't even talk to him without feeling like I was speaking to a stranger. On the third day, after another silent dinner and another round of tension-filled conversations, I finally said it out loud. "I want her gone." Daniel looked at me. His eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe guilt. But he didn't argue. Instead, he glanced at the window and then turned back to me. "She's not going anywhere, Evelyn." His tone was colder now. This wasn't about logic anymore. This was about control. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just Sabrina I was fighting for space against. It was Daniel. It's amazing how quickly things escalate when no one is willing to see the cracks before they become chasms. That evening, Daniel's family, his parents, came over. I didn't expect it, and I certainly didn't want it. But Daniel was already pacing around the house, setting the stage for something I knew was coming. He called his parents to talk about the situation, and it didn't take long for them to show up. The air in our living room felt different when they walked in. His father, Tom, was calm but firm, the kind of man who believed that life could be solved with logic and a firm hand. His mother, Joan, was the opposite, warm on the surface, but manipulative when it came to what she expected from family. They walked into my home like they had a right to be here, to be a part of the conversation, and suddenly, I wasn't the one in control anymore. Tom wasted no time. He sat down in the armchair across from me and immediately began speaking in that authoritative voice I had learned to dread. "Evelyn, we understand you're upset, but Sabrina's just here temporarily. She's going through a rough patch, and it's not right for you to make her feel unwelcome." I stared at him, feeling the words cut into my chest. The way they talked about Sabrina was like she was the injured party. I felt the blood rush to my head. "This house isn't a hotel, Tom," I said, my voice sharp before I could stop it. "I didn't sign up for this. Daniel didn't either, at least not like this." Joan looked at me with that practiced sympathy, as if she could solve everything with a soft smile. "Honey, we understand. But Daniel's been so stressed, and Sabrina is family. You can't ask her to leave when she's in such a vulnerable place." Her words were not a suggestion. It was as if they were deciding for me, deciding what was best for my marriage, for my home, for my life. And the worst part? Daniel didn't say anything to stop them. He was silent, sitting next to me with that same tired look in his eyes, as though he had already made up his mind about what was going to happen. I felt like I was sinking. By the time they left, I was emotionally exhausted. Nothing had been resolved. Sabrina was still here, and now it felt like I was the one being unreasonable. I had always thought that family should mean support, but it felt more like ownership. They expected me to just go along with whatever Daniel and his family decided. The next few days were a blur of arguments. Every time Daniel and I spoke, it was as if we were speaking different languages. He kept saying I was being unfair to Sabrina, that I didn't understand how much stress she was under. He kept talking about how hard it was for her to find a job, how much she needed support. It was like none of it mattered. Not the fact that Sabrina had been crossing lines with Daniel, not the fact that I had been more than generous in allowing her to stay. I was being portrayed as the villain. Suddenly, I was the problem. And when I tried to talk to him about how I felt, about how betrayed I felt, about how my home felt like it was slipping through my fingers. He told me I was too emotional. He told me I needed to calm down and think logically. That was when it clicked. He was no longer hearing me. He was shutting me down. And Sabrina, she was the one Daniel was listening to now, not me. I should have seen it coming, but it wasn't until the night everything went silent that I realized the true weight of what was happening to me, to us. It started with a phone call from my mother. She had heard the whispers, the tension between Daniel and me. She'd been getting texts from Joan, from Daniel's family, about how Evelyn was being unreasonable, and Sabrina was just a guest. They all painted me as the villain. It was a clear attack on my character, a slow and steady effort to make me question myself. I had always been the strong one in my family, the one who kept things together when everything around us seemed to fall apart. So hearing my mother's voice crack when she told me, "I just don't think you're handling this well," hit me like a slap to the face. My own mother. I had always thought she would be on my side, always imagined that when things went wrong, she'd be the one to back me up. But instead, she said she was worried about my marriage and that I needed to be more patient with Daniel. In that moment, the weight of everything crashed down on me. No one believed me. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I felt suffocated by the walls of my own house, the place that had always been my sanctuary. But now it felt like a prison. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do anymore. I walked through the house, hearing every creak of the floorboards beneath me. The silence felt louder than the arguments, louder than the laughter from the guest room that I had tried to ignore for so long. Sabrina was there. She was always there. I found myself standing at the threshold of the guest room, staring at the door that used to feel like a safe space. Now it was just a reminder of everything I had lost. I heard Sabrina's voice, muffled, but loud enough for me to recognize the tone of familiarity she shared with Daniel. I had no right to be angry, I told myself. She was family. They had both been through so much. But when I turned around and saw Daniel sitting there, his back to me, my heart cracked open. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain what was happening to me when I couldn't even understand it myself? What had I missed? I spent the entire night awake, lying in bed beside a man who seemed so far away. It was as if he had become a stranger in the bed I had shared for years. Sabrina was his confidant now. She was the one he leaned on, the one who understood his frustrations. She was no longer a guest. She was a part of our life in ways that had nothing to do with kindness or family. The next morning, when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I was a woman I didn't know, someone who had let herself be erased, someone who had let someone else walk into her home and claim a space that didn't belong to them. I was broken, and there was no easy fix. The clarity came in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror slowly coming together. It wasn't something I could force. It wasn't something I could rush. It was a quiet realization, a moment that sat heavy in my chest for days, until it finally broke through the haze of confusion and pain. It started the morning after the argument with my mother. Daniel was already gone when I woke up. He had left for work without a word. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was drowning in my own thoughts. I tried to push it all away, tried to breathe, tried to pretend that everything was fine, but it wasn't. I walked through the house, trying to find something, anything, that would make me feel normal again. I passed Sabrina's room and hesitated. For a moment, I considered knocking, asking her how she was doing, even though I felt a strange distance between us now. Her presence, once comforting in its familiarity, now felt intrusive. But I stopped. Instead, I went to the guest room, our guest room, and I sat down on the bed. I thought about everything. The way Sabrina had crossed lines I hadn't seen until it was too late. The way Daniel had let her do it, encouraged it, even when he knew how I felt. I thought about the months of growing tension, the cold silences, the way he had withdrawn without explanation. The turning point came when I realized one truth. I had spent too long hoping things would change. I had waited for the right moment, the right conversation. But in all that time, I had ignored the most important question of all. What was I willing to accept? I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to fix my life. I couldn't keep bending to the will of people who didn't care about my needs, my happiness, or my boundaries. I had always believed that love and family meant sacrifice, but it wasn't supposed to come at the cost of my soul, and I couldn't let myself be swallowed by it any longer. That night, when Daniel came home, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to beg him for answers anymore. I wasn't going to plead for his attention, his affection, or his understanding. I was done chasing the love he had already started to withhold. I stood in the doorway when he entered, and for the first time in months, I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at him. He seemed tired, distant, the same as always. I asked him one simple question. Do you want to fix this? Because I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was no sincerity behind them. No urgency, no warmth. I don't know, Evelyn. I'm just tired. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then we're done here. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a shouting match, but it was the end. The truth of it settled in my bones as I watched him walk past me, without a word, without a fight. He didn't even try to convince me to stay. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel that suffocating weight of uncertainty. I felt free. The days after were strange, quiet, but I knew it was the kind of silence that came from clarity, not from avoidance. I had to process what had just happened. I had to accept that the life I thought I had wasn't the life I was living anymore. But I wasn't broken. I was just starting over. The fallout wasn't immediate. It didn't come in a dramatic wave, but in the slow, painful unraveling of everything I had once believed to be stable, even invincible. The aftermath of walking away from Daniel wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about letting the truth run its course, even when it hurt. Daniel didn't fight me when I told him I was done. He didn't beg or try to reason with me, like I'd expected. Instead, he withdrew, just like he had in the months leading up to this. He didn't even apologize for the hurt he'd caused. He just let me go. And that silence spoke volumes. But the hardest part came after the divorce papers were served. Sabrina tried to reach out to me a few days later, but I ignored the calls. It felt strange, like she was trying to hold on to the relationship we'd had before. But I couldn't let her back in. Not after everything. When I finally spoke to my parents about what had happened, their reactions were expected in a way. My mother's first instinct was to ask if I was sure. She asked if maybe I had overreacted. She questioned if I had done everything I could to make it work, as if I hadn't spent months trying to understand what was happening, as if I hadn't seen the writing on the wall before it was too late. I just don't understand, she said. He's your husband. You should have fought harder. You need to make it work. Family comes first. But the truth was, I had fought. I had given Daniel everything I had, even when he stopped giving to me in return. It took a while for them to understand. It took a while for me to stop needing their approval. A week later, I received a call from Daniel's mother, Joan. She told me that Daniel was struggling and that I was being too harsh. She said Sabrina hadn't done anything wrong. She was just lonely. But I could hear the manipulation in her words. She was trying to make me feel guilty, like I had done something to ruin the family. I didn't respond to her. I couldn't. My silence was louder than anything I could have said. I didn't respond to Daniel either. Instead, I focused on myself, on the quiet that had become so much more peaceful now that he was gone. I knew the situation would get worse before it got better, but letting go had to come first. I didn't expect to feel relief, but that's exactly what came. For the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't have to question what was real anymore. I had seen the truth for what it was, and while it hurt, it also gave me clarity. Sabrina didn't show up at my door again. The last I heard, she had tried to reconnect with Daniel after I left, but she was still his family, and that meant more to him than the truth. I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The fallout was slow. It wasn't a flood, it was a drip. It came in the form of questions from mutual friends. It came through messages from my parents that felt more like guilt trips than support. But every text, every call, every comment that came through, I let them go unanswered. Because I had finally learned something important. I was no longer responsible for anyone's happiness but my own. Daniel tried to call me several times after the divorce was finalized. He left voicemails, sent texts. Each message seemed to spiral a little more, asking questions, apologizing, saying things like, I just need answers. But I never answered. I didn't need closure. I had given him years of my life, and now I was giving myself the one thing I had taken for granted all this time: space. It's funny, in a way, how letting go isn't really about the other person at all. It's about you. About finding the strength to release the things that have weighed you down for far too long, to finally accept that your story doesn't have to be written by someone else. After the divorce was finalized, after everything was said and done, I started focusing on what mattered. I focused on me. My business had grown steadily through the years, and now I finally had the time to give it the attention it deserved. My clients respected me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that confidence return. I could take charge. I could make decisions for myself without someone looking over my shoulder, without the constant background noise of betrayal. I realized I had been so busy trying to fix things for everyone else that I had forgotten about my own happiness. I had spent years trying to make a marriage work with someone who wasn't willing to meet me halfway. I had given everything, only to watch it slip through my fingers. But now, I was free. And in that freedom, I found the space to breathe, to rediscover my own needs and desires. I reconnected with the things that made me feel alive again. I started taking weekend trips to places I had always wanted to visit. I began working out more, finding peace in the quiet mornings. I even started to write again, writing not just for work, but for me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. I found new friends, people who supported me, people who didn't question my choices, people who saw me for who I was, not who they expected me to be. I built new relationships that didn't come with strings attached, that didn't require me to give more than I had. And most importantly, I found the courage to trust again. Not in anyone else, not yet, but in myself. As for Daniel, I heard through the grapevine that he had tried to reach out to Sabrina once more, but it didn't matter. By that point, I had already moved on. The man I had married, the man I thought I could trust, had shown me exactly who he was. And that person wasn't someone I could share my life with anymore. The truth about all of this? You can't force someone to love you. You can't force them to stay when they've already decided to leave. And sometimes you have to let them go, even if it feels like you're losing everything. But in doing so, you'll find yourself again. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. The house feels quieter now, but in that silence, there's peace, there's growth, there's freedom. And that's all I need to move forward. This chapter is over, but the story, it's just beginning.